No, I'm just kidding. All right, well, I have quite a few things on my mind that I wanted to, and I more want it to just be kind of an open discussion. And I'm going to read quite a bit of scripture up front. Like, I really like. Have you ever watched your favorite movie more than once? Right? 10 times maybe? Yeah, right? 50? Yeah. I'm in the wheelhouse for 50 times on Lonesome Dove. Yeah, it's a good movie. And so I think that we could reread the Bible 100 times and still benefit from it. And so when I get the chance, I'm going to read big chunks of Scripture, and then we'll talk about parts of it. But let's go to Genesis chapter 49, and we're just going to read this whole thing, and it's Jacob's blessings of his sons. And let's just read it, and then we'll see what we think about it. Then Jacob called for his sons and said, "Gather round so I can tell you what will happen to you in the days to come. Assemble and listen, sons of Jacob, listen to your father Israel. Reuben, you are my firstborn, the first sign of my strength, excelling in honor, excelling in power. Turbulent as the water, you will no longer excel, for you went up into your father's bed, onto my couch, and defiled it. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council. Let me not join their assembly. For they have killed men in their anger and hamstrung oxen as they please. Cursed be their anger so fierce and their fury so cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel. Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies, and your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down. Like a lioness, who dares to rouse him? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nation shall be his. He will tether his donkey to a vine, his colt to the choicest branch. He will wash his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes will be darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. Zebulun will live by the seashores and become a haven for ships. His border will extend towards Sidon. Issachar is a raw-boned donkey, lying down among the sheep pens. When he sees how good is his resting place and how pleasant is his land, he will bend his shoulder to the burden and submit to forced labor. Dan will provide justice for his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan will be a snake by the roadside, a viper along the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider tumbles backward. I look for your deliverance, Lord. Gad will be attacked by a band of raiders, but he will attack them at their heels. Asher's food will be rich, and he will provide delicacies fit for a king. Naphtali is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring whose branches climb over a wall. With bitterness archers attack him. They shot at him with hostility. But his bow remained steady, his strong arm stayed limber. Because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel. Because of your father's God who helps you, because of the Almighty who blesses you, with the blessings of the skies above, blessings of the deep springs below, blessings of the breast and womb, your father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains, than the bounty of the age-old hills. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, in the evening he divides the plunder. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them when he blessed them, giving each the blessing appropriate to him. What's your initial impression on those blessings? Anybody?
Wasn't real happy with it.
Yeah. You imagine, like, you know how when you envision, you know, people say, well, make peace with your parents before they die, or make peace with, you know, that type of thing. Can Could you imagine gathering those 12 dudes together and hearing him say this, and everybody thinking back over the course of your life and being like, wow, pretty awkward. Yeah. So yeah, I would say he was unhappy maybe with some of their conduct. Anything else?
Judah and Joseph. Those were the longest
Yeah.
and the most in-depth and blessed. It seemed like the most
Yeah.
blessing from their father.
And you know, I really like delving into the history of the Bible, and what's if there was irony in that blessing for Joseph, looking back, what's the irony of that?
He always stood strong. I mean, even when he says you're going to do this and this and this, then all of a sudden he gets thrown in a hole and sold to something here.
Right. If you just read Genesis 49, who would you say Jacob's favorite son is? Joseph, right? Yeah, you wouldn't even have to read any more of the Bible to figure that out. And wasn't that kind of the whole rub in the whole family growing up, is that Joseph was, so although there was reconciliation, I just think it's interesting, like, the undercurrents in that family must have been very interesting, to say the least. Yes?
But I don't understand having favorites. Yes, they're different, but I just can't fathom that.
Right. Yeah,
I
it's...
don't think it's right.
Well, and so Nace told me one interesting thing that I always take to the Old Testament is he says that as they record history, it's not necessarily a record of what we should do, it's what was done. And so the Bible records, not everybody, but the important people in the history of Jesus, that it records their imperfections along with everything else. And so it's not condoning favoritism. I think, if anything, it's demonstrating all the hassle that comes with favoritism. But yet, we do see Jacob apparently was prone to being having favorites, which caused problems. So I agree with you. I don't think it's a good thing. I think it's a human error in Jacob. So, and did he have other moral shortcomings? Right. And if we want to take that one step further, polygamy was never God's design, but it was part of the culture. So yeah, he did do that. Anything else? Can we think of anything else? Right. Yeah, I think that did play into it, absolutely. What else? Like, let's even go back before. Can you think of anything else? What's that? Absolutely, yeah. He started off being deceitful. Him and his mom, encouraged him to deceive his father. So yeah, there's a lot of definite shortcomings. And so if we wanted to just sum up all those shortcomings, like what should we make of them?
We're all human.
So what does that mean? I agree with you, but when we say that, what does that actually mean?
We're sinners.
Absolutely, yeah, we're sinners. And what do we know in spite of sin? What?
But we're forgiven if we ask Jesus to be our Savior.
Absolutely.
We still make mistakes.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing that I want to point out is, like, he talks about infidelity between one of his wives and his son. He talks about murder that his sons committed, basically animal cruelty. They were hamstringing oxen just to be mean. They mistreated their brother. They did lots and lots of things. So we could sum up their life as kind of messy, right? And but I think one thing that the the church struggles with is accepting messy people, like, and I would say there's a fine line, like the New Testament addresses that we don't want to participate in someone's sin. But we certainly don't want to look at mess as something that God can't overcome, because, the beginning of Israel, his chosen people, started out, and you guys can disagree with me, but I would characterize it as a gigantic mess. Could you imagine the family? Like, think about this. If Jacob and the wives and the boys all showed up in Ronan, Montana, the amount of gossiping fodder we would have, it would be, even if he showed up with just one wife and 6 kids, let's just pick 6 of those boys, we would have plenty to talk about, wouldn't we? And if they showed up to church, yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Look at this. It's 6 and 6.
Yeah, right. So, we would still have, we'd be horrified. That's my point. And so, I think about different people that come and go in my life, either through the church or through whatever, and it's okay to, Jesus is the hope for everybody, and especially people with messy lives, and we want to make sure that we get that knowledge put in them. A lot of times I think I see things and I'm like, whoa, they're way past church, what they're, like they can't be helped, like I think this is a thought that sometimes we have, and I just want to encourage us, like in all things and in all circumstances, Jesus is the answer. And I think we see that God does love us in spite of all our moral failings, and they can be quite dramatic and whatever. But it's kind of a side note. What I want to do is does it seem like in those blessings, right? What did it end with? Let me see here. I don't want to not get it right. The last thing he says, or the first thing he says maybe. He says, gather around, this first thing he says, verse 1, gather around so I can tell you what will happen to you in the days to come. Right? And so reading that, does it sound like there's trouble coming for Israel as a family? What? Okay, for all of us. Yeah, absolutely. To a point. I think that the more obedient you are, the less self-inflicted wounds you suffer, so there is that encouragement. I'll say this, like, there is troubles in this life for the believer and the non-believer, but I think that we need to be careful not to have a fatalistic view of life. Like, if we live a righteous life, we will have a more joyful outcome than if we live in sin. And so it's important to realize that should be the goal, and not necessarily what will be will be. We do have a hand in the course of our life. So, yeah. But can anybody think of anything specific? Just reading through this, anything that comes to mind in the history of Israel where you're like, oh yeah, Jacob said that about his sons, and then I recall this story or whatever that kind of reflected that. Anybody think of something?
I think Joseph was the closest to his father.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so do you think that carried through into the nation of Israel? Do you think Joseph and his offspring had influence in the family? I think so too. And I'm gonna go a different. Let's read verse 27 again. It says, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the plunder. And then let's go to Judges chapter 19. And we're going to pick up in verse 12. There's a situation going on where a man and his wife are working through some marital difficulties. But anyway, he went to his father-in-law's house. He stayed a few days. He wants to go, and this is where he heads out, and they want to stop at a city of the Jebusites. And this is his reply. He says, the master replied, no, we won't go into a city whose people are not Israelites. We will go on to Gibeah. He added, come, let's try to reach Gibeah or Ramah and spend the night in one of those places. So they went on, and the sun set as they neared Gibeah in Benjamin. There they stopped to spend the night. They went and sat in the city square, but no one took them in for the night. That evening, an old man from the hill country of Ephraim, who was living in Gibeah, and the inhabitants of the place where inhabitants of the place were Benjamites, came in from his work in the fields. When he looked and saw the traveler in the city square, the old man asked, where are you going, and where did you come from? He answered, we are on our way from Bethlehem to Judah, to the remote area in the hill country of Ephraim where I live. I have been to Bethlehem and Judah, and now I am going to the house of the Lord. No one has taken me in for the night. We have both straw and fodder for our donkeys, and bread and wine for ourselves, your servants, me and the woman and the young man with us. We don't need anything. He says, you are welcome at my house, the old man said. Let me supply whatever you need. Only don't spend the night in the square. He took them into his house and fed his donkeys. After they had washed their feet, they had something to eat and drink. While they were enjoying themselves, some of the wicked men of the city surrounded the house, pounding on the door, and they shouted to the old man who owned the house, bring out those men who came to your house so that we can have sex with them. The owner of the house went outside and said to them, no, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this outrageous thing. Look, here's my virgin daughter and his concubine. I will bring them out, and you can use them and do whatever you wish. But as for this man, don't do such an outrageous thing. But the men would not listen, so the man took his concubine and set her outside, and they raped her and abused her. At daybreak, the woman went back to the house where her master was staying, fell down at the door, and lay there until daylight. When the master got up in the morning, he opened the door of the house and stepped out to continue on his way, and there lay his concubine fallen in the doorway of the house with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, get up and let's go, but there was no answer. The man put her on his donkey and set out for home. When he reached home, he took a knife and cut up his concubine limb by limb into 12 parts and sent them into all of the areas of Israel. Everyone who saw it was saying to one another, such a thing has never been seen or done, not since the day the Israelites came out of Egypt. Just imagine. We must do something. So speak up. So as we read this, it's a pretty horrifying thing. You know, when you tell your kids, oh, read the Bible, and you get to something like this, you're kind of like, well, there's some explaining to do. But I think the overall important thing to realize is that moral failure and severe moral failure have always been part of mankind, and God and the Holy Spirit acting in people keeps these horrors in check, and without it, things get really, really nasty. And so then we go on to chapter 20. It says, then all of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, from the land of Gilead, came together as one and assembled before the Lord in Mizpah. The leaders of all the people of the tribes of Israel took their places in the assembly of God's people, 400,000 men armed with swords. The Benjamites heard that the Israelites had gone up to Mizpah. Then the Israelites said to us, tell us how this awful thing happened. So the Levite, the husband of the murdered woman, said that I and my concubine came to Gibeah and Benjamin to spend the night. And then he goes and he basically tells the story about what happened. And so it goes on and it says, All the men rose up together as one, saying, "None of us will go home. No, not one of us will return to his house. But now this is what we'll do to Gibeah. We'll go up against it in the order decided by casting lots. We'll take 10 men out of every 100 from all the tribes of Israel, 100 from every 1,000, and 1,000 from every 10,000, to get provisions for the army. Then when the army arrives at Gibeah and Benjamin, it can give them what they deserve for this outrageous act done in Israel." So all the Israelites got together and united as one against the city. The tribes of Israel sent messengers throughout the tribe of Benjamin, saying, "What about this awful crime and what is that was committed among you? Now turn over those wicked men of Gibeah. Now turn the wicked men of Gibeah over to us, so that we may put them to death and purge this evil from Israel." But the Benjamins would not listen to their fellow Israelites. From their towns they came to gather in Gibeah to fight against Israel. At once the Benjamites mobilized 26,000 swordsmen from their town, in addition to 700 able young men from those living in Gibeah. Among all those soldiers there were 700 select troops who were left-handed, each of whom could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 swordsmen, all of them fit for battle. The Israelites went up to Bethel and inquired of God, and they said, "Who of us is to go up first to fight against the Benjamites?" And the Lord replied, "Judah shall go first." Next morning the Israelites got up and pitched camp near Gibeah. The Israelites went out to fight the Benjamites and took battle positions against them at Gibeah. The Benjamites came out of Gibeah and cut down 22,000 Israelites in the battle that day. But the Israelites encouraged one another and again took their positions where they stationed themselves. The first day the Israelites went up and wept before the Lord until evening and inquired of the Lord. They said, "Shall we go up again and fight against the Benjamites, our fellow Israelites?" And the Lord said, "Go up against them." Then the Israelites drew near to Benjamin the second day. This time the Benjamites came out of Gibeah to oppose them, and they cut down another 18,000 Israelites, all of them armed with swords. Then the Israelites and the whole army went to Bethel, where they sat weeping before the Lord. They fasted that day until evening and presented burnt offerings and fellowship offerings to the Lord. And the Israelites inquired of the Lord. In those days the ark of the covenant of God was there with Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, and the son of Aaron, ministering before it. They asked, "Shall we go up again to fight against the Benjamites, our fellow Israelites or not?" The Lord responded, "Go, for tomorrow I'll give them into your hands." So the Israelites set an ambush around Gibeah. They went up against the Benjamites, and on the third day they took up positions against Gibeah as they had done before. The Benjamites came out to meet them and were drawn away from the city. They began to inflict casualties on the Israelites as before, so that about 30 men fell in the open field on the roads, the one leading to Bethel and the other to Gibeah. While the Benjamins were saying, "We're defeating them," as before, the Israelites were saying, "Let's retreat and draw them away from the city and the roads." All the men of Israel moved from their places and took up positions at Baal Tamar, and the Israelites ambushed charged out of its place on the west of Gibeah. Then 10,000 of Israel's young able men made a frontal assault on Gibeah. The fighting was so heavy that the Benjamites did not realize how near disaster was. The Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel, and on that day the Israelites struck down 25,100 Benjamites, all armed with the sword. The Benjamites saw that they were beaten. Now that the men of Israel had given way before Benjamin because they had relied on ambush they had set near Gibeah, those who had been in ambush made a sudden dash into Gibeah, spreading out and putting the whole city to the sword. The Israelites had arranged with the ambush that they should send up a great cloud of smoke from the city, and then the Israelites would counterattack. The Benjamites had begun to inflict casualties on the Israelites, about 30, and they said, "We are defeating them as before." But when the column of smoke began to rise, the Benjamites turned and saw the whole city going up in smoke. Then the Israelites counterattacked, and the Benjamites were terrified because they realized that disaster had come on them. So they fled before the Israelites in the direction of the wilderness, but they could not escape the battle. And the Israelites who had came out of the towns cut them down there. They surrounded the Benjamites and chased them and easily overran them in the vicinity of Gibeah on the east. 18,000 Benjamites fell, all of them valiant fighters. As they turned and fled towards the wilderness to the rock of Ramon, the Israelites cut down 5,000 men along the roads. They kept pressing after the Benjamites as far as Gidom and struck down 2,000 more. On that day, 25,000 Benjamite swordsmen fell, all of them valiant fighters. But 600 of them turned and fled into the wilderness to the rock of Ramon, where they stayed 4 months. The men of Israel went back to Benjamin and put all the towns to the sword, including the animals and everything else they found. All the towns they came across they set on fire. Wow. Right? Has anybody ever read any of the history books about about the damage that some of the wolves did when they started killing livestock. And I'm not telling you that the wolves are just bad. I'm just saying that they're incredibly destructive. And a lot of them had a start because, just to be fair, like a trapper or something. There's one that was a 3-toed wolf, and a trapper had trapped him and took off 2 of his toes, and so he started killing cattle. And killed thousands and thousands of dollars worth of cattle over years and years and years. And that was just one. So I just thought it struck me when it said that Benjamin was a ravenous wolf. Like ravenous wolves are destructive. Just a regular wolf on a regular day can be destructive. And so when those boys sat there listening to their father say this, do you think they thought there would be ever a time where they'd fight each other to the tune of 50,000+ of them killing each other in open fields and burning cities and all this stuff? That's unimaginable destruction, isn't it? And you might be saying, well, Levi, what does that have to do with today, right? We should always strive to apply what we learn in the Bible to something that applies to us today. And so I want to mention this. When the founding fathers started this country, it wasn't just completely a unified deal. There was lots of disagreements. They had some things that they all agreed on, and they agreed enough to get together and push forward on the ideals that they agreed with. But there were certainly things that they didn't agree on. Can anybody think of one thing that they might not have agreed on?
Presidency.
Yeah. Something that had a consequence, a moral stance that had a consequence to the United States later on.
Slavery.
Yes, very good. Thank you, Max. Slavery. Some were for it and some were against it. And the ones that were for it wouldn't give in, and the ones that were against it decided to set aside their moral stance for the sake of the nation. And then what was the consequence of that? And not just a civil war. The bloodiest war that the United States has ever fought. And you could say, well, obviously because we fought against each other. But even that aside, it was the bloodiest, nasty, meanest, blood-filled fight ever. And you know what Abraham Lincoln said about it? Anybody? He wondered when the blood of the whips of the slaveholders would be satisfied by the blood of American boys. Interesting, isn't it? The leaders of this country felt like the Civil War was a consequence of moral failure. The wars in Israel were a consequence of what? Moral failure, absolutely. And we can look back and we can say that as uncomfortable as it would to be standing there with your dad on his deathbed being like, I didn't appreciate you fooling around with my wife. I didn't appreciate all the people you two killed. I didn't appreciate you mistreating my favorite boy over here. Come over here. I got a page full of cool things to say for you. We could just imagine how weird this all is and how uncomfortable. But they couldn't fathom the consequence of thousands of young men butchering each other out on open fields. And the irony of it all is it could have been avoided, right? What did Benjamin have to do? What's that? Well, Benjamin could have. And then the tribe of Benjamin in Judges, what could they have done?
Well, they could have turned over the wrongdoer instead of fighting and protecting.
Right. Yeah. They could have admitted that was an inexcusable moral misstep and let the consequence be meted out, couldn't they? It's interesting to think about why they didn't. I always wonder about these weird abstract things, you know. Was it because they were part of a popular leading family, you know? Why was it? You know? Like, if someone was raping and murdering people, and a bunch of dudes showed up here with guns and been like, they're raping and murdering people and we want them, we'd be like, yeah, go for it. You know, I agree. Yes.
What if it's my brother?
Absolutely.
Then maybe I don't agree.
Exactly. It's an interesting thought, huh? It's interesting to see what motivates people, you know, like, it was God first in the tribe of Benjamin's decision, or maybe it was their brother, maybe it was their good buddy, maybe it was people that had built the city, you know, maybe they were the leading citizens of the city. Who knows? We don't know. It doesn't comment. But it's interesting. Makes you wonder.
Family pride.
Right.
There is family ties there.
Absolutely. But I have cousins. I only have like maybe 50 cousins. And my willingness to fight for them gets pretty thin right about there, let alone my second cousins, let alone 19,000 of them. And I'm not disagreeing with you. It very well could be that they had a very different perspective of family. And we see that like in Afghanistan. You know, we fight people that view family and extended family a lot differently than we do. And so I think you're right. There was some family ties that maybe as Americans we don't understand. But nevertheless, they chose to take an immoral stance. And it was costly to them. Absolutely. That's a good point, Jim. I'm glad I was going to mention that. It's the second time in the Bible it records the conduct of men that's so reprehensible that we don't really read it in open church, do we? Like, we don't really read too many stories about men raping people in open church because we're just like, that's really inappropriate. But if we don't acknowledge the history of mankind and what we're capable of, absence of God, we're doomed to repeat it. And I wanted to make that point about our founding fathers made a judgment to put their moral convictions aside to benefit, the birth of a nation and, the improved financial situations and whatever, right, that they had. And it was costly. And it was costly in a way that scarred families forever. And is it totally gone away? No. Oh, absolutely not. What were we doing the last year? Ripping down statues, banning flags, renaming schools, still brewing. Being called racist. Yeah, absolutely. It's still like that moral failure is still rippling through our society today. I want to read you something. How are we doing for time? Decent. All right. One of the creepiest yet most revealing Twitter threads ever to be posted on the platform, a teacher recently fretted out loud that virtual classes might allow parents to hear them brainwashing their kids. Matthew R. Kay, an educator and author of a book on how to lead meaningful race conversations in the classroom, worried that conservative parents would be able to interfere with the, quote, messy work of indoctrinating children into critical race theory, gender theory, and other left-wing dogmas. Here's the entire thread, which has since been set to private. And I'm just going to keep reading through this. So this fall, virtual class discussion will have many potential spectators, parents, siblings, etc., in the same room. We'll never be quite sure who is overhearing the discourse. What does this do for our equity inclusion work? How much have students depended on the, and it's in parentheses, somewhat secure barriers of our physical classrooms to encourage vulnerability? How many of us have installed some version of, quote, what happened here stays here to help this. While conversation about race are in my wheelhouse and remain a concern in this no-walls environment, I am most intrigued by the damage that, quote, helicopter snowplow parents can do in the host conversations about gender and sexuality. While conservative parents are my chief concern, I know that the damage can come from the left too. If we are engaged in the messy work of destabilizing kids' racism or homophobia or transphobia, how much do we want their classmates' parents piling on? It's important to note that while some teachers responded to Kay's comments with the appropriate level of horror and disgust, many others chimed in to share their own strategies for brainwashing during a pandemic. One teacher said she'd also been thinking about the problem Kay described and had decided she'd ask students about their preferred pronouns via survey, although she still worries that, quote, caregivers might see and learn something about their children that they weren't supposed to know. Another teacher said that students last semester would sometimes, quote, type secrets into the chat whenever the discussion turned to anti-racism and gender-inclusive content. Another complained that a white parent, she made sure to specify white, in her district recorded a Zoom class and filed a complaint against teacher for an anti-racist read aloud, saying the teacher's commentary was inappropriate and biased. This, the teacher says, is, quote, going to be an issue. A 9th grade teacher shared in the commiseration saying that her class required students to, quote, read and respond to news articles, but that participation in this exercise is stunted now because, quote, outsiders are listening. The outsiders, to be clear, are the children's parents. A teacher with pronouns listed in her Twitter handle said that she plans to use the chat function more than the voice lectures because she wants children to share, quote, information with her in a parentless way. A science teacher agreed with all the sentiments expressed here and summarized it bluntly. Parents are dangerous. And these are just some of the comments that were captured in screenshots before the tweets were all made private. Presumably there is more where this came from, a lot more. So I'll just stop right there. Any thoughts? Yeah. Yep.
Why I teach second grade.
Yeah.
I think there's way too many issues for, it's a different world. And so all the issues that they're dealing with now, yeah, it would be very hard.
Yeah.
We went through all that stuff in the Army. Race relations and race relations classes, 8 hours a day for a week. And the largest amount of racist people came out of those classes that I've ever seen in my life. Black, white, Mexican, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Because they didn't teach enough. They taught you how to be a racist, but they didn't teach you how not to be one.
Yeah.
Leave us alone. We were friends. We liked each other. We drank together. We partied together. Now, we don't even want to be in the same room. It's stupid.
Yeah. Well, and isn't it kind of interesting that they have, weeks and weeks of classes and curriculum, and the Bible just took one sentence to sum up how race relations should work. Any ideas? Yeah, love your neighbor as yourself. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Coca-Cola wants you to be less white. We call people morons who are trying to be less white than the Army.
Yeah.
I want to be like the brothers over here or these guys over here.
Right.
Dude, you know how stupid you sound?
Right.
You can't compete with these guys. I mean, I seen white guys, they couldn't dribble down their let alone play basketball. And
Yeah.
it's like, dude, it ain't happening. You're playing with professionals.
But they can dream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. That was a big dream.
But the issue here is that when we look across, we can see a lot of differences, right? Even in this small group, we can see a lot of differences. But if we look up and we see Christ and we all try to live Christ-like, then we wouldn't see differences, right? And so that's where, I just want you all to be thinking about, we hear these things and we say, wow, right? But I think we can establish from the Bible and our own history that when we have moral failure, the consequence is usually measured in blood and bodies. That's the consequence. And so I'm just going to read this one thing. What would happen if a child were to spend most of his waking hours during most of his formative years in an institution bent on persuading him to adopt certain fundamental beliefs? There's no mystery here. Children are easy to manipulate. They are eager to please, especially in school settings where their grades and future careers depend on it. The child would eventually yield to the days and years of pressure and embrace the beliefs thrust upon him. And what if those fundamental beliefs were at war with his families? We should be speaking in present tense, for this is what happens today, every day, to Christians' children in America while their parents sleep. Many of America's public schools have become morally toxic, especially for the hearts and minds of children from religious families. To say authors Mary Hassan and Teresa Farnan in their bracing and deeply researched new book, Get Out Now, Why You Should Pull Your Child from Public School Before It's Too Late. The threat does not come from dedicated teachers who are just trying to do their jobs, but from progressive ideologues who have become our nation's educated elites. If you wonder why your fourth grader comes home sounding like a social justice warrior, you can thank the National Network of State Teachers of the Year for pushing a book list for elementary students with themes of classism, racism, xenophobia, sexism, and transgenderism. Even while schools are becoming successful instruments for the leftist social reform, they are failing at the core mission to educate children in the basic academic subjects. The latest national assessment is devastating, says Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. 2/3 of American students can't read at grade level, and reading scores have worsened in 31 states. This country is in a student achievement crisis, and over the past decade, it has continued to worsen, especially for our most vulnerable students. Sex education is the most obvious area of indoctrination. Well-funded international pressure groups have been extraordinarily successful at pushing comprehensive sexual education in American public schools in both politically liberal and conservative regions. CSE promotes risky behavior to vulnerable teens disguised as rights and focuses on the LGBTQ sexuality as a victim class. Lessons are carefully designed to encourage children to approve of homosexual behavior and to reject the beliefs and authority of their parents. So I'm just going to stop there. We have to ask ourselves too, so that's, and I just read that opinion, and I'm just going to throw this out here right up front. I'm not promoting homeschool or going to school. I will say that we all live in one society and one country, and like the parents that approved of slavery and the parents who didn't approve of slavery, they both had grandkids killed in the Civil War. And if we don't become a little more energetic in teaching our children God's moral law and the relationship through Jesus and the salvation that you can have in belief in Him and the forgiveness for sins, we will all have relatives that die in the next consequence of this moral failure. So it doesn't really matter. You know, I'm just saying I didn't bring this up to argue about public school versus homeschool. That's not even, it's not relevant necessarily to what I'm presenting. I'm presenting the fact that, well, and I'll just make one blunt point. The children are required to be educated 4 or 5 days a week, right? And the church has opted to try to educate kids 1 night a week. And if we as a church don't have the energy to clamor in here and show them how important it is, they can only assume that it's not quite as important as the stuff that we have them do all the rest of the time during the week. And so I just want to encourage you guys, myself as well. I want us to mutually encourage each other to realize that right now we're standing on the precipice of a huge decision. And if we don't have the energy to do what God says is right, then we doom our future generations to a bloody correction of violating God's law, I would say. Feel free to disagree. Yes?
I think all through the scriptures, it's the parents that are supposed to teach their kids. I'm not opposed to churches doing things, but if the parents aren't doing it at home, I don't know if the church has enough time with the kids to get it done. It happens sometimes, but a lot of parents have just kind of said, school, you educate my kids, church, you educate them spiritually, and I'll live like I want. That's my point of view.
Amen.
That's my mind.
Yes.
I think that just calls us then to, even if you're not a teacher, to love on those kids as well as you can in the circumstances you're given, whatever your gift is. And so I know, I see daily that is in fact correct. And it's not only I'm not going to parent my kids in the way of God or anything else, it's I'm not going to parent my kid. I'm not, period.
Yeah.
And so I think what we can do as a church is number one, pray. We can also love on them when you can and know that no matter what your circumstances are, there's a lot worse in this community and elsewhere in the world that are horrifying. And I see it daily. And so just prayer, I mean, and do what you can to help these kids. I often feel I was called to be a teacher for this reason. I didn't become a teacher until I was 40. So it's like God told me, get out there. And it's not like I'm going to school every day preaching the Word of God. But I am hopeful that in my actions and what I do, they see that and they learn that. And so, yeah, I mean, we can talk about how there is so much moral failure, and I totally get that. But I think as humans, we can only do what we're capable of doing to help offset that. And it's gonna happen, and it's scary. Like, everything you read is so scary. But I also know we can just do what we can do. I don't even know what my point is, but
No, so it's the fact that what I said pricked enough emotion in you to say something makes me feel like it's a win. Like, as I was thinking about this, I was like, well, it's not that I want to start an all-out Donnybrook in Sunday school since Nace isn't refereeing, but I do want people to feel enough emotions to say something. Like, I feel like it's a failure to come to church, one person talk, and everybody else be so neutral on the subject matter that they don't even bother to say something, And Max, I value your point, and I agree with your point. And let me clarify, I don't think that children should be sent to church absent their parents to learn the Word of God. But I think families should value worshiping their God in ways, like worshiping God should be serious because he's holy and reverent and fearful, and we should worship him that way. But we can also have fun inside being obedient to God. Like fun doesn't happen just outside the church. And so we certainly want to portray a picture where our Christian faith dictates everything that we do in our life. It just kills me when kids say, oh, I watched an awesome movie. Sweet, what is it? Well, we couldn't watch it here at church. Well, God didn't approve of you watching it then when you did watch it, period. I mean, that's just not arguable, yes.
a girl now, a young woman, and every member of their family's there. The mother's there, the father's there, the aunts are there, the uncles are there. And we have had situations where these girls are in labor and they want an epidural, and the mom says no because I want you to learn that what you did was wrong. And so, and I don't know if any of you know this, but no matter how young they are, once they become pregnant, they're an emancipated minor. You no longer have any say in what they do. They're emancipated. They can make their own decisions. And you just want to look at those parents and say, you're too late. Where were you when they were running the streets, when they were doing what they weren't supposed to do? Where were you? You're too late. You know, and it just makes you realize that in this day and age, you can't be your kid's friend. You have to be a parent. You have to, you know, be that example of, you know, of showing them what God's, you know, the 10 Commandments and what's right and what's wrong. Because you can't just show up one day in force when they're 13 and pregnant. Because, yeah, I mean, you have no idea what it's like to go in to help a 13-year-old breastfeed, and they're watching on a Sunday morning SpongeBob SquarePants.
Yeah, you're right. You win. I don't have any idea. I was going to say I know a lot of things, but yeah.
It's, you know, I think I don't know if it's just our nation or whatever, but we can't keep being their friend. We have to be the parents, you know. So I don't know if that's totally off the subject, but
No, it's not.
Go ahead, ma'am. Yes.
I often wonder where they came up with that mentality that they don't have to parent. That's what God gave parents for, was to guide them. They wouldn't need parents if they could grow up on their own.
Right. Well, when you live outside of God's law, you know, there's lots of things that, yes, Max.
And I'm not against kids programs, and I'm not really, most of my experience is elsewhere, not here locally.
Yeah.
But we put a lot of effort into kids programs, but if the problem is the parents, maybe we need to put some effort into some parent programs.
Yeah, yes, amen.
If we get someone, a young couple, and they didn't grow up in the church, they become saved, well, we might have to teach them how to be Christian parents.
Absolutely.
And while I'm on it, one of the biggest failures, and again I'm talking about elsewhere, is men a lot of times have kind of said, well, it's the woman's job to take care of raising my kids in the Lord. I have to go golfing.
Yeah. No, I think these are all very valid points. I'm not saying that one thing's a fix-all and the other isn't. I agree with you. Like, we definitely have, I mean, look around at our age demographic. We have an issue with, you know, parent-aged people being in and influenced by the church, you know, and it's a myriad of things that are causing it. I just, you know, I'm glad I started the discussion. I think everybody has made some very good, valid points, and I hope that, you know, so there's two types of fear. You know, as a cop, you want officers to live with a healthy amount of fear that makes them aware so that they are careful, but you don't want them to be paralyzed by fear and incapable of acting to help themselves. So, as that's my goal as a congregation, is I want to scare you, but not to paralysis. All right. So that's the goal. Hey, Jim. I'm gonna go to TJ. He raised his hand, and I'm gonna go to you. Yes.
I think it's just as a society, like the downward spiral of you have parents that want to parent, then you have a society that says, "Oh, you can't discipline your kids because that's child abuse." They go to school, and school can't discipline the kids because then the parents are mad at the school because the parents weren't disciplined. So, well, how dare you discipline my child? That's my job. And the parent doesn't discipline. Now you just have a bunch of rugrats running around that have no idea what cause and effect is, what consequences are. They go home, they tell the parents to F off, and the parents are like, what do I do with you? I got an idea, you wanna borrow my belt? I'm gonna do it for you. You know, and we watched the kid do this, throw a timber tantrum with his mom in the line. They couldn't take their car to the coffee shop, and he just standing there screaming at his mom, and he's 5. His mom's like, acts like she wants to say, do it! He's not gonna learn if you just go, keep doing it, I don't know, I don't want to be called in to the cops.
Yeah, these are all tough societal situations. Jim, anybody else? And then, Jim, and then you'll be last. Go ahead.
The things that you're bringing up, that you're talking about, I'm gonna bring up for the LGBT.
Alphabet, yes.
Yeah, people that in the left don't understand. I don't dislike you. I don't dislike Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. I don't know them. I don't like their politics.
Yep.
Now, do I love them? Yes. I pray for them every day. I pray for other people all the time. I don't agree with the way you live. I don't agree with your life choices. You know? And I'll leave it in the Christian era and not go into my army terms.
Yeah.
You know?
Probably a good thing.
So, and that's just the way it is. I love you to death. I don't agree with how you live.
Right.
And that's the same with parenting. You know?
Well, and
they're your kids.
right. We can say we love somebody, but love is shown, right?
Yeah.
Like I love you doesn't mean anything till you do something to show it. And so I think that's the challenge of the church today, is to show love. We can say it all we want, but until we show it, it's hard to believe. Yes, last.
I think I can safely say I'm the youngest parent here. But we've been blessed with a little boy who, even though he's 2 years old, is extremely sensitive. Because we're not perfect, and we fight. And we've noticed a trend in RJ. If we sit down to the dinner table, usually they eat their food first and then we eat. And if we have even a little argument, not necessarily a full-blown fight, just an argument, he will push his plate or bowl away and sit there with a frown on his face. And if we raise our voice at all, and he will not eat, he will not drink until we apologize to him and to each other, and then he will take his bowl and he will continue on. You know, to me, that just shows there's no age when they're not impressionable.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely no age. You know, I've got this indwelling tendency of, they're not really old enough yet.
To understand, yeah.
No, they are.
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
And that's where it's allowed me to really grow to the point of, everything that I do. My 4-year-old, she's to the copycat stage.
It's the worst.
I don't care what it is. She's going to say it.
Yeah.
Whether it's good or bad. If it's Thomas on the TV, or if it's me saying good grief, she's going to repeat it 2 seconds later. And I would say that the Lord has really used that in both mine and Andrea's lives to be like, hey, check yourself. Are
Yeah.
Are you doing what is going to lead these kids closer to Him, or are you doing something that's going to lead them more in their rebellion from Him?
Yeah.
And I've learned that there's no age where they're not impressionable.
Oh boy. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it's good points. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody's comments, and I hope you understand the intent is to, cause you to think longer than just in the moment, and not to offend, trying to offend anybody. But I do feel called, like emotion tied with information is much stronger than just information or emotion, either one. And so I think it's important to invoke emotion while we teach so that people have more of a memory of it and think about it longer. So thank you all. Let's close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you for your Son Jesus and the fact that he died on the cross. And I just thank you for the knowledge that no matter what the problem is, Lord, that the solution can be found in you, Lord. Like there's nothing